Welcome to meeting number 31 of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to take a few make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and the members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Now, before we proceed with our distinguished witnesses today, there is the matter of the election of vice chair. I'd like to, yes. So before we get into that, I'd like to welcome two new members of this committee, well-known members to the House, Mr. Randy Hoback from Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, and Mr. Dave Epp from Chatham-Kent, Leamington, Ontario. They will replace Mr. Marty Morantz and Mr. Ziad Abultaif, whom I think I speak on behalf of everyone in this committee when I thank them for their collaboration with other members of this committee. Therefore, since Mr. Morantz is no longer a member of the committee, the clerk will proceed with the election of the first vice president. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, pursuant to Standing Order 1062, the first vice chair must be a member of the official opposition. I am now prepared to receive motion for the first vice chair. Mr. Michael Chung.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that Mr. Garnet Genuis be nominated for the position of vice chair of this committee.
Thank you. It has been moved by Mr. Michael Chung that Mr. Garnet Genuis be elected as first vice chair of the committee. Are there any further motions? Is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt the motion? I'll still be here. Yes. Thank you. So, pursuant to the House Order of Thursday, June 23rd, 2022, I declare the motion carried and Mr. Garnet Genuis duly elected first vice chair of the committee.
Congratulations, Mr. Genuis. Now, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, January 31st, 2022, the committee resumes its study of the situation at the Russia-Ukraine border and implications for peace and security. It is now my pleasure to welcome two incredibly distinguished witnesses for the purposes of our committee today. First, we have Ms. Evgenia Kara-Murza, Advocacy Coordinator of the Free Russia Foundation, and of course, wife of unjustly imprisoned Russian opposition leader Vladimir Kara-Murza. We also have a second guest, someone who is well known to all the members of this committee. We are incredibly honored to also have Professor Irwin Cutler, our former Minister of Justice, and someone who has often shared his expertise with us. But today, he is here in his capacity as the founder and international chair of the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, as well as the special envoy of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Community of Democracies in the case of Vladimir Kara-Murza. Now, each of you will be provided 5 minutes for your opening remarks, after which members will have the opportunity to ask you questions. That having been said, I would like to say at the outset that because this hearing is starting somewhat late, unfortunately, Mr. Kotler is required to leave at 5:25 because of another engagement and another commitment, while Ms. Kara-Murza can only stay with us till 5:45. So without much further ado, Ms. Karamurza, the floor is yours for your opening remarks for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. First of all, I would like to say how grateful I am to be offered this platform to continue my husband's hugely important work on behalf of political prisoners in the Russian Federation, on behalf of Russian civil society. And I would also like to say how deeply honored and humbled I am to have Professor Erwin Kotler, a towering figure in the struggle for human rights around the world, as my ally in my struggle, in my fight for the release of my husband, Vladimir Kara-Murza. Thank you so very much, Professor. For almost 8 months, we have been witnessing a bloody massacre of the Ukrainian people by the Russian army sent to Ukraine by an increasingly deranged dictator in the Kremlin. It seems the world has finally realized or was forced to stop closing its eyes to who Mr. Putin truly is, and is now watching in horror, thinking about what else this madman is capable of. People like my husband, Vladimir Kara-Murza, have known it for over 2 decades and have tried time and again to warn the world about the danger of appeasing a dictator and looking for compromises in dealing with a bully who sees every compromise as his opponent's weakness. The horrible truth about this war is that it was not unexpected, but came as the result of over 2 decades of impunity that Vladimir Putin has enjoyed while oppressing his own people and carrying out his other military campaigns. For years, he's had the opponents of his regime murdered, both in Russia and on foreign soil, and has broken numerous international laws by leading a war in Chechnya, by invading Georgia, by annexing Crimea, by bombing Syria. All of this with no serious repercussions for himself or the regime that he's built. Emboldened by continuous impunity, Vladimir Putin ended up believing that he could get away with pretty much anything and launched a full-blown war of aggression against our closest neighbor, killing thousands and displacing millions. The aggression against Ukraine goes hand in hand with a massive-scale repression in Russia. In his Nobel lecture in December 1975, Andrei Sakharov named 126 prisoners of conscience in the Soviet Union. Today, according to Memorial, Russia's most respected human rights NGO, there are 500 political prisoners in the Russian Federation. According to Memorial itself, this number is pretty conservative, since the NGO is using very strict criteria to determine someone a political prisoner, and dozens of cases are still being reviewed. In a Moscow Mechanism report released in Vienna on September the 22nd of this year, OSCE rapporteur Professor Nussberger pointed out that, and I quote, even though the time frame for the mission was extremely short, the rapporteur was able to collect much more material than could be included in the report. This is due to the enormous dimension of the human rights problems civil society in Russia is facing. According to OVD Info, an independent media project on human rights and political persecution in Russia, since February 24th of this year, 19,335 people have been arbitrarily detained across the country. Over 4,000 administrative cases and hundreds of criminal cases, including against my husband, have been opened against anti-war protesters. Since February, protests have never stopped, and detention stories are becoming increasingly horrific. Russian journalist Marina Ponomarenko, who is facing up to 10 years in prison for a Telegram post about the Russian bombing of a theater in Mariupol, was sent to a psychiatric hospital for a so-called evaluation, during which she was tortured and injected with unknown substances. Thus, we're witnessing the revival of punitive psychiatry that was widely used against Soviet dissidents. This case is awfully reminiscent of those of Natalia Grabanevskaya and Viktor Feinberg, 2 of the 7 people who went out into the Red Square to protest against the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968, and were then sent to a psychiatric hospital to be treated for insanity, because anyone contradicting the official narrative was then, and is being again, portrayed as either a criminal or an insane person. Poet and activist Artem Kamardin was beaten and raped with a dumbbell by police officers during his arrest for reciting anti-war poetry at an anti-mobilization event in Moscow. He was denied hospitalization and is now facing a prison term for, as the official police report said, inciting hatred with a threat of violence. While he was being raped, his girlfriend, Alexandra Popova, was being beaten and threatened with a group rape in the next room. Police officers were pulling her hair out and putting super glue on her face. Andrei Pivovarov, Lilia Chanisheva, Yuri Dmitriev, Alexei Gorinov, Igor Maltsev, Ilya Yashin, Alexei Navalny, Alexander Skochilenko, Dmitry Talantov, Victoria Petrova, Daria Ivanova. I could read these names for hours. One of those charged for spreading, as the government calls it, fake news about Putin's war in Ukraine is my husband, Vladimir Kara-Murza, who refused to be intimidated despite 2 assassination attacks on him perpetrated by a team of FSB operatives in retaliation for his tireless advocacy for the introduction of personal, targeted sanctions against criminals and murderers of the Putin regime. The same advocacy for which Boris Nemtsov paid the ultimate price when he was assassinated on Bolshoi Moskvoretsky Bridge in Moscow in 2015. Since his arrest in early April, Vladimir has been designated as a foreign agent by the Russian authorities and as a prisoner of conscience by Amnesty International. Just over a week ago, he was awarded the Václav Havel Human Rights Prize by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, by the Václav Havel Library and the Charta 77 Foundation, and at the same time was charged with high treason by the Russian government. My husband, the father of my 3 children, is now facing up to 24 years in prison for standing up to the regime of murderers and for believing that our country deserves a better future. As Elie Wiesel said in his Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech, what all these victims above need above all is to know that they're not alone, that we're not forgetting them, that when their voices are stifled, we shall lend them ours, that while their freedom depends on ours, the quality of our freedom depends on theirs. So I'm here today because their voices need to be heard, and my husband's voice needs to be heard, the voice of my partner, my best friend, the father of my children, who has risked his life time and again to make sure that the world knows that a lot of Russians reject this regime and everything it stands for. I am here today to ask the global democratic community to find ways to acknowledge these brave Russians and to recognize their fight, because these people give us hope that Russia has a future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kara-Murza. We now go to Professor Erwin Cutler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. May I say how delighted I am to be able to join Evgeny Vladimir's partner in their joint heroic odyssey on behalf of the Russian people, on behalf of the Ukrainian people, on behalf of the struggle for democracy and human rights, indeed, on behalf of our common humanity. Indeed, Vladimir is the ultimate Russian patriot and dissident, in the best tradition of the father of the Russian dissident movement, Andrei Sakharov. What Sakharov once said of Sharansky, when he said that the trial of Anatoly Sharansky is a trial of human rights, as it was then in the Soviet Union, can now be said of Vladimir Kara-Murza, that the persecution and prosecution of Vladimir Kara-Murza is really the persecution and prosecution of the best of what Russia is all about. Vladimir, like his hero Boris Nemtsov, the democratic leader of the Russian opposition, who was tragically assassinated in February 2015, has himself been the target of 2 assassination attempts. Vladimir, like Václav Havel, who spoke truth to power, has now been awarded, as Evgeny said, the Václav Havel, rightly so, a human rights prize, but prosecuted by Putin for seeking and speaking the truth. Vladimir, a journalist, an award-winning journalist, has had not only his expression silenced, but criminalized. Vladimir, an incredible filmmaker, and just yesterday evening we saw one of his films on a Russian heroic cleric, Father Ederstein. The title of the film was My Duty Not to Be Silent, not to be complicit with evil. And indeed, that is the duty and the responsibility of all of us. And this committee is in a position to break that silence and to take a necessary action. Vladimir, a global architect of Magnitsky sanctions, now personifies the need to impose Magnitsky sanction on all those involved in his arbitrary arrest, detention, persecution, and prosecution. And indeed, in each and in all of these, there is a clear Canadian connection. Vladimir has a clear Canadian connection. He came to Canada in 2011 when I was then the chair of the Foreign Affairs, a member of the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on International Human Rights, and I tabled the first draft of what was to become Magnitsky legislation. But it was Vladimir who came here with Boris Nemtsov, along with Bill Browder, to support that legislation. And when he was asked at that point, isn't this legislation anti-Russian? He said, no, this is the most pro-Russian legislation you can find. This is legislation on behalf of the Russian people. And I would say this is legislation on behalf of the Canadian people in protection of Canadian sovereignty, security, economy, human dignity. And so Vladimir therefore personified these objectives and paid a price. He came to testify in 2015 before this Foreign Affairs Committee. He was a principal witness when we were considering Magnitsky legislation, went back to Russia, was targeted for assassination, poison, and almost died. In 2017, when the committee reconvened after an election, Vladimir again was a principal witness before this committee, which led to the adoption of such legislation, went back to Russia, again targeted for assassination, poison, and almost died. He emerged and is a hero of the struggle for democracy and human rights in Russia and beyond. And the global Magnitsky sanctions is but one expression of that initiative of his that is protective, as I say, of the Russian people and protective of democracy. And it was Vladimir, as Evgeny has mentioned as well, who warned against indifference and inaction in the face of Putin's culture of corruption and criminality. It was Vladimir who warned us that it was our silence when Putin bombarded and assaulted Chechnya, when he invaded Georgia, when he annexed the Crimea, when he bombarded Syria, when he was engaged in massive domestic repression. It was the silence, the indifference, the inaction of the international community that not only indulged this culture of corruption and criminality, but incentivized this culture of impunity. And Evgeny has been bringing this message, as Vladimir was bringing that message all these years. And the importance, therefore, to stand up now in your hearings with regard to the Ukraine, because Putin probably said if the international community did nothing with Chechnya, with Georgia, with the Crimea, with Syria, with my massive repression, he wouldn't say it, but during the massive repression, why should they care if I go into the Ukraine, which is not an independent country anyway, which is not an independent people, which is part of us, which I have to denazi, et cetera, the whole culture of misinformation. And so our indifference and inaction incentivized impunity and our responsibility to act. And so I close by saying this, that while it is essential that we provide and have been providing and need to provide even more to the Ukrainian people, military support, economic support, humanitarian assistance, sanctions, it is particularly important as well in terms of Vladimir's case as a looking glass into all that I've mentioned, that we impose targeted Magnitsky sanctions on all those engaged, as I said, in his arbitrary arrest, detention, persecution, and prosecution. That we, as Evgeny said, support Russian civil society, that we support those 19,000 who have been arbitrarily arrested and detained, for which Vladimir stands as a looking glass, and that we take his case and cause as a need for us to take the necessary initiatives, and I'll be happy to elaborate on any question beyond it, with regard to protecting against arbitrary detention, to protecting media freedom, to protecting and promoting democracy and human rights, to imposing necessary sanctions and the like. So thank you for your attention, and I'll be delighted to respond to any questions, but mostly to hear Evgeny in her testimony.
Thank you, Professor Kotler. Now we'll open it to questions from the members. But again, just to remind you, Professor Kotler has to leave in approximately 8 minutes, and Ms. Karamurza in approximately half an hour. So we start off with Mr. Chong. Mr. Chong, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Kotler and Madame Karamurza, for your opening remarks. And Madame, I want to convey on behalf, I think, of all members of this committee, our thanks for you being here, for your bravery, your dedication, your stoicism in the face of the persecution of your husband. We very much appreciate you taking the time to testify in front of us today. Madame Karamurza, you're one of the few people that have come to our committee that have eyes and ears in on what is going on in Russia today, since much of contact with the outside world has been cut. And I know we talked about this earlier privately, but I'd like to go on the record about it today. The New York Times has reported this week that Western intelligence has estimated that about a third to half of all the 200,000 strong invasion force are casualties. That's an astounding number of some 67,000 to 100,000 casualties that the Russian military has suffered since it began its invasion of Ukraine on February 24th. And so my question is, what are your Russian contacts telling you about the impact that these casualties are having on the Putin regime?
Thank you very much for your question. For a very long time, Vladimir Putin avoided declaring mobilization because he knew that this would be a very unpopular measure. And for a very long time, he wanted the majority of the Russian population to not be affected by war, for it to be somewhere out there. And the majority of those soldiers had been drafted from Russia's poorest regions, the ethnic minority regions, where people live below poverty line. And many of them were signing the contract because they considered it their way out of poverty, which does not excuse it, but is just to demonstrate how the regime has been exploiting ethnic minorities in Russia and how it has been using these people to fuel the war. Now that after the declaration of the mobilization, and this is not a partial mobilization, the law itself on mobilization does not have the word partial anywhere in it. So this is actually, this means that Vladimir Putin will be drafting as many soldiers as he needs to buy time to get to the winter, to wear you out, to wear the West, the global democratic West out, to wear Ukrainians out, and to cover the front line with corpses of Russian soldiers. Now that this mobilization is affecting the majority the majority of the Russian territory, I do believe that we will be seeing some changes. And I mean, the changes have already been happening. It's just that because in the absence of free media, free election, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, all basic fundamental freedoms, people do not have any ways to express their frustration anymore, and they're switching to partisan movements very often.
Well, thank you for that answer. I have two quick questions on how we can support Russian civil society and the Russian opposition in Russia, and more specifically, how we can counter the disinformation that's being spread by the regime in Russia and provide the Russian people with good information. So my first quick question is, are there any credible public opinion pollsters in Russia?
Opinion polls are very often used by the regime nowadays to create the semblance of overwhelming support for Mr. Putin and his regime. Those results of opinion polls are claiming that the majority of the Russian population stands behind Putin and his regime. But what I've told in my remarks shows a different picture. Had Vladimir Putin really enjoyed that overwhelming support of the Russian population, he would not be recurrent to mass repression, the use of punitive psychiatry, torture, widespread torture, and violence and brutalities by police. He would not need to do that. The number of political prisoners that grows by the day shows that the situation in Russia is not as the regime wants to portray it. Just 2 weeks ago, I was speaking at the OSCE Human Dimension Conference in Warsaw, and I mentioned the number of political prisoners according to Memorial. Then it was 488. Today, this is 500. And it grows. It continues growing by the day. So I would discourage you from trusting the results of opinion polls conducted in a totalitarian state-by-state controlled pollsters.
Thank you for that answer. And very quick second question. We no longer live in the age of long-wave, shortwave broadcasts, long-distance shortwave broadcasts that we once used to provide information around the world to populations of authoritarian regimes. Some people have suggested that Canada should be funding virtual private networks and VPN technology to allow Russians access through these VPNs to information in Russian from credible outside sources. What do you think of that idea?
I can tell you that the number of VPN services installed since February is skyrocketing in Russia. So people are looking for access to independent, objective information. The entire media space in Russia has been basically cleansed. There is nothing independent or objective left anymore, readily accessible to, readily available to the majority of the Russian population. And people who do have internet access in Russia are trying to find ways to access that independent information. A countless number of Russian journalists were forced to leave the country, and they continue the very important work of providing, producing informational content for the Russian-speaking population. And so by installing VPN services, they get that access. So this is a very good measure to support in countering propaganda. But also we need to consider one very important thing. Vladimir Putin knows how powerful propaganda is, how powerful his this tool is, and he's been. This is why he began his rule by closing down one independent TV channel after another. And by 2003, the majority of the Russian population that relies on TV as the main source of information had no access to one single independent TV channel. Since 2003, that's 19 years of hearing the same exact message over and over again. Russia is a great country surrounded by enemies. Everyone out there wants to see us on our knees. Everyone wants to see Russia's demise. Everyone out there hates you. 19 years of that. And since February, the last three remaining major media outlets, Echo of Moscow radio station, Dosh TV station that only operated online, and Novaya Gazeta were all forced to close down their operations or were closed down by the government. They moved outside of Russia and they continue their very important work. So they should be supported. And Vladimir Putin has been putting billions of dollars in his propaganda machine to maintain the level of aggression and misinformation in society that would allow him to continue with warmongering by just severing the majority of the Russian population from real information about what is happening in Ukraine. And those independent media outlets that have been forced out of Russia and now operating from outside, they of course have nothing similar to the funding of propagandist media. I mean, it's just their funding cannot be compared. So their work needs a lot of support.
There's 6 minutes, but we're way over that. We're almost hitting 10 minutes
Absolutely.
now. So just to allow other members to ask questions.
I ask that the other parties get equal amount of time?
Yes, I think there would be,
No.
10
Just a
minutes.
reality, because then Ms. McPherson will not have time. Let's put that up.
Well, that's,
next we go to Mr. Oliphant.
thank you both for being here. And while I'm loath to make speeches and I like to ask questions, I want to start by saying one of your comments struck me, and if there's one message I want you to take back with you, is that we will not be worn out. Neither the government of Canada nor I believe the Parliament of Canada is going to be worn out by Putin in this war. So I want you to take that back. It's not easy because fatigue does set in, but I think we are energized by two things. The dissidents who continue to be brave in Russia and continue to speak and continue to work and continue to act, and the people of Ukraine who continue to fight and act. And that is empowering to us. So please take that message back with you. Following up on Mr. Chong, there's a couple of areas I want to talk about. It's when we look at and trying to discern the difference between Russians and Putin, and it blurs because he has such massive support at times. In your understanding, and I know you don't have complete access to all this sort of information, is it respect for Putin? Is it fear of Putin? Or is it fatigue and powerlessness that seem to be the enemy of enabling Russia to be what Russia should be?
Well, first of all, I don't believe that Vladimir Putin has ever enjoyed the overwhelming support of the majority of the Russian population, because the last free and fair election, free but not fair election according to international organizations, took place in Russia in 2003. That's 19 years of stolen elections. So Vladimir Putin re-elected himself time and again president in the absence of any alternative. And all the opponents, all his opponents who could have provided this alternative were either killed, like Boris Nemtsov, or thrown in prison, like Alexei Navalny. So that basically describes how much support he has. And when we talk about the Russian population, and they say what just, you know, I think it is very difficult to assess, to evaluate the state of mind of the Russian society as a whole, in the absence, again, of free media, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, all the basic freedoms, free opinion polls. How do you assess the state of mind of these people? Yes, many of them have been brainwashed, because I already mentioned 19 years of propaganda, and the majority of the Russian population relies on TV as the main source of information. I mean, in bigger cities, of course, they have access to internet. You move into the country, there are no public toilets. There are no toilets, let alone internet. They don't know what a VPN service is. So yes, many of them have been brainwashed. Many of them have been scared into silence, because when people are being raped while being arrested, of course, it is done to scare the rest of them into silence, to intimidate them and to show them what might happen to them if they even risk doing anything of the kind. And I just want to say that you see all the pictures, and I see all the pictures that are being thrown out there by Russian propaganda with these Z people, you know, those who put kids in Z shapes on the snow in the streets. This is a very aggressive part of society, but this is a minority. Why you are seeing this is because there are no independent media, and the only media in Russia are propagandist media, and this is the only image that they want to throw out there for you to rely on.
One of our problems as a democratic, liberal democracy is we don't always have the tools to fight that propaganda machine in any way. And so an analysis of what's going on is important for us to have the right tools to do it. Your husband was very clear that international presence, international persistence, and naming is important to be done. That's been a theme he's had. And this may be to Professor Kotler, Erwin, and I had forgotten I had met Vladimir until you told us about the meeting in 2011. What should Canada be doing in terms of that? We now have Sergei Lavrov saying he will downgrade Western presence of Russia because we're the enemy. We need to speak. We need to be present, to name. How do we do? What do we do, and how do we do it?
So I've just been notified that I must do, so I'll do it quickly, some one-liners in terms of action items. Number one, Canada led the way on adopting the Declaration of Arbitrary Detention in state-to-state relations. Vladimir is a case study of that. He's also a citizen of the UK as well as of Russia. We are convening these signatories to that declaration in February. We should use his case as a case study for the mobilization against the arbitrary detention. Number two, we are also co-chairs of the Media Freedom Coalition. Media freedom has been not only silenced but criminalized in Russia, as Evgeny said. We should use our chair and leadership of the Media Freedom Coalition, again, with Vladimir's case as a case study. Number three, and speaking now as a special envoy for the community of democracies, Canada has now just assumed the chair of the Executive Council of the Community of Democracies. Again, this is an opportunity within that forum of the Community of Democracies to highlight Vladimir's struggle for democracy in Russia, in Ukraine, and on behalf of ours. Number four, with regard to Magnitsky sanctions, I'm glad that Canada is taking the lead in imposing the targeted sanctions, but we have to internationalize the Magnitsky sanctions, and so we should take leadership in developing a concerted international strategy with regard to Magnitsky sanctions. And finally, I'll just mention one other thing with regard to Putin's aggression. While war crimes, crimes against humanity, etc., there are legal and judicial remedies. There is not for the crime of aggression. We need to support the establishment of an independent tribunal for the crime of aggression so that Putin and all those who are aiding and abetting in this crime of aggression against the Ukrainian people can be brought to justice. Thank you.
You normally have 6, so you only had 5 today. 2.5 extra minutes can go to the NDP and the bloc. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Oliphant. We now go to Mr. Lemire.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good day, and thank you. Your testimony reminds us that we need to be rigorous and firm with Russia, and we hope this message is heard around the world and is heard in Russia. It's a most honorable message, and I'm deeply touched. I feel the love that you have for your people, and this leads us to wish to take action. But my first thought, of course, is for your good husband with concern for his state. Could we hear how he is? Do you have any contact with him? What are the conditions of his detention, and what can we do as Quebecers and as Canadians to help? Thank you so much for your question and for your kind words. Vladimir is being held in a detention center in Moscow, awaiting his trial, you see. I have not spoken with him, and I have not seen him since the month of April. My contact with him is merely through his attorney. But there I have a good deal of luck, given that this attorney is a good friend of our families. He was Boris Nemtsov's attorney before he was assassinated. And after Nemtsov was assassinated, he worked with Vladimir and Margaret Gasertovas, the president of OECBA, on her report on Boris Nemtsov's assassination. And I believe that that's when they became friends. So I have full confidence in his work as the attorney for my husband, and full confidence that he will do the best that he is able for my husband. Of course, the decision about my husband's fate has already been taken, given that he is held to be a high traitor. That's the accusation. He could now be imprisoned for up to 24 years if the full penalty is applied. I think that the only chance of his getting out of the Russian prison is to bring down the Russian regime. And my aim is to work so that that happens sooner rather than later. That's the aim of all my work now.
My small nail in the coffin of this regime.
Vous avez répondu en
You have already answered my second question. What is what you and your husband are working for? What is your cause? And how broadly is your voice heard around the world, in Canada, the United States, and other large countries and powerful countries? What's your appreciation of that? I'm sorry, I will answer in English, given that I'm afraid I will lack the right words in French, and I want to make sure that my message is heard.
All understand that the condition for this region, for the entire Europe, to be finally at peace with itself, with everyone, is for the regime in Russia to fall. And there are, in my opinion, 3 key factors that would bring this day forward, and I'm trying to carry this message everywhere I go. So the first key factor is, of course, Ukraine's victory, and Ukraine's victory on Ukraine's terms, which means that every single Russian soldier has to leave the Ukrainian territory, including the illegally occupied zones. And Ukraine has shown everyone how strongly, how resilient they are, how strong they are, how amazing they are in fighting not just for themselves. They're not fighting just for themselves. They're fighting for democracy. They're fighting for freedom. It is the quintessential fight of the good against the evil. And I think that they deserve all the help and support. And if they need more weapons, they should get more weapons. And if they need more humanitarian help, this is what they should get, because they're fighting for all of us, and their fight is admirable. The second key factor that would bring closer the downfall of the regime is, I believe, sanctions, both economic sanctions that would cripple Russia's economy and that would make it costlier for the regime to continue the warmongering, and targeted sanctions, targeted personal sanctions, because they target specific individuals implicated in gross human rights violations. And they also send a very clear signal to Russian civil society that the global democratic community sees a difference between the regime that has been oppressing its people and Russian civil society that tries to oppose it and tries to fight back. And the third key factor, well, I already mentioned, is support for Russian civil society, for all those people who find courage to go out and protest and say no to this war, to all those Russian NGOs and Russian journalists and human rights activists that were forced to leave the country to be able to continue the very important work from outside. In my work, I very often rely on what they can provide, on the information they can provide. provide. I rely on the information that Memorial can provide on political persecution, the number of political prisoners, individual cases. I rely on the information that OVD provides. And all these organizations have their people on the ground working, providing this information and making it possible for us to carry the message further. So I believe these are the three factors that would bring closer the downfall of the Putin regime. And this will make it possible for those Russians who stand up to Putin to make sure that Russia can never be turned into an authoritarian or a totalitarian regime anymore. And this will mean that we will be able to start building that whole and free Europe that all of us want to see.
Mon temps est écoulé, mais je vous remercie.
I am out of town, but I would like to thank you for speaking in French and wish you good courage.
Ms. McPherson.
Thank you, Ms. Karamirza. And I know that you do have to leave now, so I won't ask you some questions, but I do want to take a moment to tell you, you spoke to me on Tuesday. We were able to sit down and talk, and I'm deeply moved by what you've done and your strength. You talked about your husband and his integrity. You spoke of how it's not always easy to live with a man with such integrity, but I look at you and I see somebody with such incredible integrity and strength, and to describe yourself as a small nail in the coffin is wrong. You are a giant force that is doing so much for the Russian people. And I know I speak on behalf of all of us when I say that we will continue to raise your husband's name in the House of Commons. We will continue to talk about your husband and all those who are being detained. We will continue to fight for Ukraine, and we will continue to fight to make sure that Vladimir Putin cannot continue to oppress the people of Russia.
Thank you so very much for giving me this incredible opportunity to address you all, and thank you very much for all the insightful questions. And I could talk for hours because there's so many messages and there is so much rage inside of me because this person has turned my country into a country aggressor. And I will keep putting my nail deep in because I will never, never forgive him for what he's been doing to my family, for what he's been doing to my country. And I do very much appreciate all the help and support and solidarity that I've seen here during my visit. Thank you so very much.
Ms. Kara-Murza, allow me to say thank you ever so much for your powerful and your compelling testimony. What you have done is not only provided us with information about the continued prosecution and persecution of your husband, but you have also reminded each and every one of us that we have individual obligations as well as collective obligations. So much as was underscored by the other members, allow me to say each of us recognize full well that we have to continue to stand by you. We have to continue to ensure that our government does work with the government of the United Kingdom. And I certainly look forward to very soon, hopefully, once again having the honor of having your husband in our parliament. Thank you very much.
Except with unanimous consent, we could do a photo if you have time for a photo with the members of the committee.
Is it agreed unanimously? Sure, we can suspend. That's the better approach. So we will suspend. We will be going. In camera, you can introduce a motion, right?
Can we? Yeah, but it's a substantive issue that should be done in public. Can we just? I mean, I'd like to operate by consensus.
No, I'm sorry. you.